Eastham Finance Committee meeting on Wednesday, September 9th. This meeting will be video recorded and available on the town website at www.eastham-ma.gov and also on channel 18. This is a Zoom meeting pursuant to the emergency order of Governor Baker. So welcome all. I'm glad you're here. Let's hope we can get through this thing relatively quickly today. So the first order of business is the minutes. We have two sets of minutes of August 12th and August 19th. So let's start with August 12th. Does anyone have anything they want to say or change on the August 12th minutes that I sent around to everyone? All right, do I hear a motion?
I make a motion that the minutes be accepted.
That's Mary. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Who was that?
That's Tom.
Tom. All right. The reason I'm asking is we had to go back and do stuff. We had to go back and do help Karen out because she couldn't figure out who said what. So fortunately, we take notes. All right. Do we have any discussion on the minutes of August 12th?
I just want to add what you've just said, Jerry. I want to thank Karen because our meetings have been extremely long. This particular meeting was lengthy and numerous minutes and approvals, and she's doing it by watching it and not knowing exactly who's talking sometimes, and I got confused as to who's talking, and so I just want to thank Karen because this is humongous work.
Yeah, she does a great job for us, and I really appreciate it, and thank Jackie for allowing her to do it for us. So do I have any further discussion on the minutes of August 12th? If not, we'll go through a vote. It has to be roll call, of course, so we'll start with Rick.
Yes.
Peter.
Yes.
Steve C.
Yes.
George. You're muted, George, so.
Yes.
Okay, Mary.
Yes.
Steve Z.
Yes to the 12th. I was absent on the other one.
Right, yeah, we'll get that. Russ.
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
I think we got everybody. All right. So now the minutes for Wednesday, August 19th, that special meeting we had. Do we have any discussion on that? All right, do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
That's Russ. Okay, hold on. Do I have a second?
I will second.
And Mary's the second. Any further discussion? Okay, roll call vote again. Rick?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
Steve Cole?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
Russ?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
And Steve Z.
Abstain.
He abstains because he was not at the meeting. Okay. All right. So Jackie's not here, but I wanted to quickly change the agenda slightly. I was going to turn to her, but I think Mike has given us some ideas. I want to make sure that everyone hears what's up and what we plan to do on Saturday, September 26th. So before Steve Zebel has to leave. We want to try and meet. We want to meet a half an hour before the meeting begins, so that would be 9:30 in the morning. It appears that we are going to be on the home side where the press box is, the home side bleachers of the football field. So let's come on onto there. We are normally, from the audience side, looking at the home field bleachers. We would probably likely be on the right side. So let us meet, which would end up being the north side of those bleachers, away from the school. So let's try and meet on the bleachers on the north side, farthest away from the school. We'll go there. If there's anything that's up, I'll call the meeting to order, but if there's no changes on the warrant or anything, I won't even call it to order, but we'll be ready. We will,
Gary,
yes,
Gary, I don't understand the concept of changes in the warrant. There can't be
Oh.
changes in the warrant. The warrant's,
right.
warrant's in
My
the can.
miss.
Do we have anything to vote on as a finance committee?
We might, if someone, for example, if one of those, what's happened in the past, if one of those petitioner warrants is adjusted so that we know that they're going to make, for example, that one that was going to be a bylaw and they decide if they can do it, I don't know if they can, to make it a resolution, and we
The
voted
climate change one.
yeah, the climate change. We voted 9-0 against it. If they say they're going to do that, we might then quickly, we've done this before, have a vote to see what we would say if it were a resolution. And if the motion's made and it is a resolution, then we can tell the moderator and make an announcement that here's the vote if it were a resolution of recommendation from the finance committee. That would be the only change, Steve.
I'm not comfortable with that. First of all, they can change their petition, they can change the article. They could make a motion that is more user-friendly than the articles seem to be. That they can do if the moderator says it's okay, it's within the scope. But we made our recommendation already, and in fact, doesn't the report we wrote in the warrant say that we were in favor of this if it was a resolution?
Yes.
So I just don't know that there's anything for us to vote on. By the time this comes up, it'll be on the floor. If you want to, as the chair of the committee, speak to the motion and say the finance committee, as it says on page 3, likes this amended motion, you could do that. But we don't have anything to vote on before the meeting. And there's no opportunity for an announcement from the moderator of the finance committee's vote, because it won't happen until they actually make a motion and the moderator accepts it.
Right.
So anyway, for whatever it's worth,
Yeah.
we can come early and have a cup of coffee together. I don't mind that, but I don't
Yeah.
see any basis for voting on anything.
Well, we had a vote on the school. We had a vote on the air conditioning, the
Middle school, the middle school.
the middle school auditorium, and they made the change, and we voted against it 6-1 or something of that sort. And we did make that announcement after the motion was made, and the school committee in their motion changed that to say they would not use that $350,000, I think, for air conditioning the auditorium. And we had a discussion of that at that half-hour meeting, and I was able to announce, to tell the moderator we wanted to say something, that we therefore would not oppose that. We would not recommend voting against that section. That was
So we hadn't voted on that previously, had we, Jerry? I mean,
No, we had not voted on them
Yeah.
pulling off the, and we didn't make any recommendation to that because we had no clue that they were going to do that. So,
Right. But usually when we vote on something before town meeting, it's because we haven't voted on it before. And maybe there's
yeah, and I don't think there's anything, from what I understand, there's nothing that's going to change on this, on the warrant. But I don't mind if you guys don't want to have a meeting, I'm fine with just show up, be there by 10 o'clock and we'll get it so we're 6 feet apart and everyone's safe. And if someone wants to be further away, they can be a lonely end, off on the end. We'll be well set. The only thing, now I did talk with Jackie, the only other thing that will occur in normal town meeting, we have a mic in front of us, or a shared mic, two of us. They won't have that many mics, so if people want to speak, we'll have to figure out a way to exchange mics, but I think we can't figure that out till we're there. So it might be worthwhile to be there at least 15 minutes early so we can figure out where we're sitting and what we're doing. I won't call a meeting or even announce that there's a meeting. We're fine. And we'll go. But just so you know where we are, let's go to the north side, away from that's where we're going to be sitting, and we'll figure out how we're going to sit. Make sure you bring a mask, and we'll be set. All right?
All right. Yes.
So that the next thing back on the agenda is I wanted a little bit of update, financial update from Rich, particularly looking at. And I know it's difficult because we switched, it's over 2 fiscal years, but what's happening with the real estate tax collection, even though it was due in 2020, may have come in 21, what's happened, what happened with income from the recs, from the parking, beach parking and all of that stuff, and what's going on, and any other changes that occurred. So Rich, it's the court's the ball's in your court now.
Well, thanks, Jerry. And I'm sorry I didn't have this for you in advance, but I just pulled it together this morning, and I will email this out to the group probably tomorrow at this point. But I'll share on my screen a couple of reports that I pulled off our accounting system this morning. The first is just to revisit, just to give you some context. Everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Revenue report for the fiscal year 2020, and much better than our preliminary look, as the last couple of days made a big difference, especially on the property tax, with the due date being the 30th. I'm just going to pull this over so I can see it a little bit better. So as you see, I think back the preliminary that we provided, whoops. Was in the magnitude of like a $300,000 shortfall. But at this point, with completion through June, property taxes are substantially all collected, 99.7%. It's within
Wow.
the
Great.
amount of the overlay that we've provided. So cash flow wise, that doesn't impact us too much. And you'll see when I show you the report for the first couple of months of fiscal year 21 that we've made that up. So collections picked up right at the end and continued in the first couple of weeks of July. I do have some concern about some of the local receipts, just to monitor. With the economy slowing down, motor vehicle excise is typically a lagging indicator. It takes a year or two till you see some impacts. So I do have some concern about that, but we were a little bit short on our motor vehicle excise at 97% of budget. Generally, you want to be, in good times, 10 to 15% below your actuals, your budget to your actuals. But that's been more than made up for by down here under the hotel motel, which at this point, the big difference there is the short-term rental tax. We won't be able to get the numbers for FY20, although I may be able to derive them to kind of indicate how much is from the traditional hotel motel versus the short-term rentals. But going forward, I've been working with the Department of Revenue, and they'll be able to send us a report, manually be able to send us a report quarterly as to the breakout between traditional hotel motel and single, and the homes. So we'll get that, and we'll account for that separately. So you can decide how you want to apply that to the budgeting process or some other reserve, or however you want to proceed with that.
Mm-hmm.
Meals tax was just about on target. Water collections, was over budget by quite a bit, which was good to see, which is, I think we're up to about 1,200 connections at this point, with them increasing little by little. Beach stickers for the fiscal year was up about 3.5% from what we had budgeted. And solid waste fees were also up. So all in all, and I'll just scroll down, a bunch of receipts that summarize the 1 weak spot was on licenses, permits, and fees. And so I am going to go back and see if I can find out and identify what caused that. I suspect it has to do with some significant building projects that had occurred, that had some big fee revenues associated with them, that got baked into the budget, but obviously they're one-off projects, so they didn't keep recurring. So I actually already had a conversation with our town planner on that, and we'll be following that through. And we're short on fines and forfeitures, but that's a relatively negligible amount. A lot of that's dependent upon what we get from the court. All in all, this blue line here, total local receipts, about 15% higher than budget for the fiscal year 2020.
It's amazing.
$637,000.
That's great. Well, of course, part of that, and that's a compliment to staff, I think, part of that is that you didn't include any money from short-term rental in the plan.
Exactly.
Right.
So that's, I mean, that's great. You don't count your chickens before they hatch, and I think it's worked well. So compliment. So bravo to you on that.
And then at the bottom here, we have state revenue, which usually comes in pretty much on target. For the grand total, when you factor in the shortfall, the small shortfall in the property taxes, about 102% over budget, which is pretty good, all things considered.
Yeah, great.
So that's
I'm amazed that beach receipts is up year over year.
yeah. And wait till you see FY21.
Yeah, yeah.
One simple question. You had something on there called rental fines, and since I rent my house, I'm interested in what the rental fines are for.
Well, if your name is Russ, it's a high fine. That's all it is.
Be careful what you wish for, Jerry.
Could we give him Miranda warnings?
Yeah, right.
Russ, I'll have to look into that. I'm still working on drilling down onto all the details of what all these accounts mean and how we account for them. But I can get, when I email this out, I'll give you that answer.
Yeah, I just want to be able to look out for where my pitfalls are.
So now I'm going to share with you a similar report. I've consolidated a little bit because there's a lot of things that just aren't relevant at this point. They haven't come in. For example, motor vehicle excise. There's been no commitments for the fiscal year. So these represent collections on prior commitments. But it is comparing where we are compared to last year at this time with 2 months in. So as you can see, let's work on the property taxes first. Last year we were about 144,000. This year about 300,000.
Wow.
That has to do with the extra collections coming in on the levy that was due on June 30th. So to the extent we were running short or had some properties that got a notice, they came in and largely paid. We do have a couple of high-profile properties that we will have to follow up on and keep up our collection efforts on. But after July and August have July essentially passed, we are pretty much whole where we were normally on property tax collections.
Great.
You can see that motor vehicle excise and boat excise, penalties and interest, both are trending up compared to the same time last year. Again, motor vehicle excise, years ago I had done an analysis for when we do financial projections, and it indicated that a moderate downturn that you would expect a 10% decrease, and the sensitivity analysis on it was a worst case scenario being about just about a 20% decrease in motor vehicle excise and a severe economic downturn. And so with the budget actions we've taken for FY21, we've kind of protected against that. Again, that's at least a 1 year, if not a 2 year lagging result. So that's something to keep an eye on.
Mm-hmm.
Water charges continues to improve, 63% higher than prior year at this time. Beach, which was a key indicator for me, better year this year than we had last year at this time through August.
Really
16%.
unbelievable.
Probably because of the COVID, people here.
Yeah, we had a lot of people, and we've extended the date through September for a few weeks. So perhaps the September will be even further when we compare September to September.
Yeah,
Great.
amazing.
Construction activity doesn't seem to have slowed down much with the solid waste. Slightly higher than it was. Again, the one area where we're weak compared this year, August to last year at this time, licenses, permits, and fees. So that's one of the areas I need to focus on and find out what's going on with that. You're never going to hit it perfectly, but you don't want to be, order of magnitude more than 10 or 15% off and something like that. If we can figure out what's going on there, and that's really it. So at this point, we're 18% higher than we were last year as far as cash receipts through August.
Wow. That's wonderful. It's amazing.
And
Anyone
then,
have, oh, go ahead, Rick.
one more piece of information to share with you. What I typically have done in the past in other communities, we're going through the process of closing the books, and we prepare a financial statement that we provide to our auditors, and we provide it to the Department of Revenue. And that ought to be done shortly. We'll probably submit it right after town meeting, and that will trigger our free cash certification. And so when we get that, I usually do a presentation showing, what were the key drivers of free cash, over receipts over what we budget or savings on appropriations. So you'd expect to see those things we just looked at again. And I also just want to give you a flavor of our budget report. This is probably something easier for you to review when you get it on email. But this is all the town general fund appropriations. And if you were to look through this available budget column here, this one was a very tight budget. We made it by about $4. And you'll see that most of them are pretty tight budgets. But there are some spots. You didn't spend your reserve fund, for example. So that returns back and becomes part of our free cash. Health insurance and energy, if I can find those. Let's see. Were good areas or areas where our budget performed well and we had savings that were returned. Let's see. Here's one. Police salaries is a good said quite a bit of savings on overtime. So we had $142,000 savings on the police department budget.
Whoa.
Good.
Yeah.
$89,000 on the fire department budget.
Great.
And
Is that
I'm not seeing
overtime
that.
too? Rich, was that overtime too?
Yes, largely.
Yeah, Rich, why do you think the overtime is down so substantially, particularly in the police?
Well, call volume, but for police, probably has to do, and this is something I'd love to get into. I've, again, done it in other communities. It's part of getting into the nitty-gritty of what makes the town operate.
Yeah.
But by and large, most of the time when I've seen things like this, it has to do with line of duty injuries. If you've got officers out on an injured leave, you got to replace them and fill them with replacements that are coming in overtime. So if they're not hurt, you're not generating overtime. So one of the things that was nice to see in Eastham when I got here on the fire department side is something that we put in place in Yarmouth. We did a lot of study on it, and we actually got a grant from Assistance to Firefighters grant to get power lift stretchers. Back injuries were the leading cause of injuries for the fire department, and it generated hundreds of thousands of dollars of overtime due to that. And so I think we're in our third year now of those power lift stretchers over in Yarmouth, and line of duty injuries and overtime has dropped considerably. And so there's things like that, and you start delving into these details that you can find stuff like that out and try to make some corrective actions.
Rich, my memory, am I wrong? I thought Eastham did that at last year's town meeting.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I was glad to see when I got
Oh,
here that you
okay,
have these
yeah.
stretchers already. Yeah.
Okay, great, yeah.
The one area I want to point out to you, hopefully it's on your screen, is the elementary school budget. As this report prints out off the system, it shows a savings of about $366,000. We don't have that savings.
That's
Most of that represents
pay.
summer salaries, exactly. So we've got to encumber that. We make a manual entry to when we close the books to account for that. And so when we do that, we're left with, like $80 or something.
Right.
So, which is great. They spent what we gave them.
Right.
So the bottom line, you can peruse this when you get it, but I'll just show you the bottom line here. Savings on appropriations, 1.6 less the school encumbrance is 1,263,000 are the savings on appropriations. So when you combine that with the surplus receipts on the local receipts, we're upwards of $2 million, and that will be a big component of what drives free cash this year.
Wow. That's wonderful. We're in the middle of a pandemic and we're doing all right. Bravo.
It remains to be seen as how things look, for the rest of this year. But the things that we worried about with local receipts, with recreation and beaches, didn't seem to materialize. So now my big concern going forward would be that issue I mentioned about the license, permits, and fees. I want to get to the bottom of that. And we don't know what's going to happen with motor vehicle excise if people aren't buying new cars. As you probably all know, you buy a new car and you spend $500, $600, $800 on excise tax that first year, and then it drops precipitously in years 2, 3, 4, and subsequent. So if you buy and hold, each year goes by, the excise tax goes down. So it's a matter of, are people going to be holding on to their cars an extra couple of years, given everything that's going on?
I think I've heard that a lot of people are buying used cars.
Well, that's the same, same with the used cars. They if it's not new, you're not getting taxed to the hilt on that one. It's $25 per $1,000 of value on the excise.
Yeah. All right. Anybody have any further questions to Rich? Great. Rich, thank you. That was
I have a question.
Mary.
Mary, go.
Yeah, Rich, I've been hearing a couple of things from different towns where folks are staying in town around the Cape and doing remote work, and their children are starting to get involved with the local school systems. Have you heard anything regarding additional students from Eastham getting involved with either our elementary school or at the other levels?
I've heard, I don't have a number for Eastham. Something I do want to get, because obviously the school assessment from the Nauset Regional School District is largely driven by that population.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, and I don't quote me, and Linda, I know you're from the Independent, so please don't quote me on this, so this is off the record, but as 50, I heard a crazy number of 50 new students in Truro Public Schools, which Truro is not part of the Nauset District, but if that's a huge number for a tiny town.
Right.
And I guess it only really matters if, Eastham were to get 50 or 100 or whatever the number might be, and nobody else got any, but then our percentage goes way up. But if we're going up consistently across the board, it's not impactful. But that is going to be a big part of what drives the school assessment to the town this coming year. So that's another thing we have to get our hands around. I did spend lots of time for a number of years breaking down regional school district assessment formulas, so it's one of the things I kind of actually like to get into. So that might be a discussion we can have someday on what drives that assessment for the town. And Jerry, I do have a couple of updates, but I guess I can wait to the town administrator's report so you can continue with your, because otherwise I just go on all night.
So I have another question, Mike. Now that the Village Green is the village at
No.
I'm sorry? The
Nauset.
village at Nauset Green is filled. Has that caused some additional students for the elementary school?
Yeah, that's part of what we'll have to see. So that was not 100% complete. We actually just spent some time looking at this property from an assessment perspective. As of January 1, it wasn't 100% complete, but you did have some people moved in into some buildings, and obviously those have been going up. And so, yeah, it'd be interesting to see when we look at October 1 enrollment numbers this year to last year, if we can kind of pinpoint what's driving that. But that's the classic discussion that you have about development that happens all around the metro area over the last 20 years, is bringing in development a good thing for our community. And, people, the traditional look at it is, yeah, it's bringing in new growth and new development, and that's great. But when you do the cost of services associated with that development, what's the impact? So that's the type of thing we can take a look at it as well.
So October 1 is the date when they said, here's what the enrollment is. That's typical for Virginia, where I'm from originally, so.
Yeah, and it's a curious thing. A lot of these old regional school district agreements go on October 1 enrollments, but of course, since 1993, when education reform came into effect, a lot of these districts measure, a lot of the new agreements reference not the October 1 enrollments, but rather the actual bodies in the seats, because the foundation enrollments on October 1 can be different from those who actually attend your schools because of school choice and charter.
Mhm.
So.
All right. Peter, did you have a question, Peter?
No.
Oh, Mary, I think I just cut you off, Mary. Go ahead.
No, I just saying thank you to Mike. I'm interested in hearing, when we get the data, what those additional families, students are.
All right. Any other questions for Rich? Okay, we'll quickly go on to the next one, which is any discussion on the warrant. I hope all of you got in the mail the warrant. The only thing I know that is a potential that will occur, just so you're not going to be surprised, is Article 33, where I've recused myself because of the COVID. They didn't go through planning and so forth. So that article on dealing with making Tolman Drive a part of it, a public way, the town has suggested that this be postponed, and being the petitioner, we're going to accept that. So we're not going to be voting on Article 33 at the meeting.
Hey, Jerry?
Yes.
It happened automatically, so I assume either you or one of the select board persons will make a motion.
Yes, I'm going to talk with Scott to see whether do you want me to do it, or it's going to be.
Scott won't care. It's
whatever you want. I'll talk.
maybe he will care, but
yeah.
I just wanted to be clear that it just doesn't happen because the select board agreed. Okay.
Right, I have to say that's the case. Thanks, Steve. The only other reason I put this on here was something that Steve Cole had sort of mentioned, potentially on those two petition articles we voted against totally. Does anyone have any desire on this committee to fashion an amendment to those articles after it's made? An amendment that the finance committee would basically project. I just bring this up. I don't necessarily like that, because amendments, as Steve knows very well, amendments cause lots of confusion sometimes at town meetings, because, we're voting only on the amendment. There's call the question. This is only on the amendment discussion, and you have to vote on the original. But I just wanted to raise it. If someone wanted to do it, we will have that discussion. Otherwise, we'll move on. Anybody have any desire of anything to discuss that? Hearing none, we move on to the next item, is the town administrator's report. And Jackie's not here, but Rich, you said you might have had a couple of other things you wanted to raise.
Yeah, I just want to give you an update on a few items, and I'll start with why Jackie's not here. Jackie's and I were both at a Cape and Islands Water Protection Trust meeting before this meeting. As you might recall, that's the trust that receives the 2.75% from the short-term rental tax, comprised of all the towns on the Cape. They hadn't met too much since COVID started, but the bylaw committee, subcommittee of that group, has been meeting, and they are presenting to that board today the bylaws of how to, including how to distribute proceeds from that trust. So that's something I'd been involved with from the beginning, and I had some very specific feelings about how that ought to occur, especially with crediting each community with proceeds derived from that community, and that's not how the bylaws have been presented at this point. So I'd be curious to get an update after I can talk to Jackie and a couple of the other managers about their perspectives, but I do know that there's probably some communities, likely on the Upper Cape, that support that, and then there's probably some communities probably on the Lower Cape that aren't going to support the provision that you don't get credited for proceeds going to the trust coming from your community. You know, Provincetown is surprisingly probably the largest contributor. I think it's bigger than Barnstable. If not, it's the second largest contributor of all the communities on the Cape. And I just can't imagine, you know, Provincetown and Chatham not wanting to get their equitable share back out of that trust. And so it'll be an interesting discussion, but that's going to be ongoing, I'm sure. So at some point it does impact the finances of the town, because that is a potential revenue source for us to tap into for wastewater and water development. So how that plays out is important. So we'll give you updates on that as we get more information. Where right now I'm preparing, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but normally I'm way ahead of where I feel like I am now in other communities that I've worked. So I'm getting the budget book for FY22 drafted. So right after town meeting, I'll be setting up meetings with department heads and going over budgets and capital plan. So we'll be able to update you on that. And if you have if this committee has any feedback as to some things I'd like to see, I'd be happy to hear that and take that into account as we move forward. But I like being ahead of the game on that stuff. So I'm trying to move on that with our salary projections and our budget discussions and our capital plan.
Okay. Richard, will we still go, is this the plan still to go through the normal type procedure we've done? We generally have joint meetings between the select board and the finance committee, meeting with a couple of department heads. We meet with the schools, we meet with the police and fire, and sometimes there's some others we meet with. Is that still in the plan?
I would imagine we'd do all of that. This is more along the line of me getting up to speed with the departments and making sure I understand everything they're asking for and all that good stuff, and making sure they've done their due diligence. I don't want to put anybody in front of you that's just coming up with stuff that isn't needed. We want to make sure that you have confidence that we're coming in front of you with stuff that's needed, not just a wish list. So,
all right, thank you.
And then the other part of that is once I get that sorted out and moving along, we do have some bond activity coming up. We have a need right now to borrow for a revenue anticipation note. We have some cash flow issues with all the projects and budgets we have going on. Same as we did last year, and I believe it the year before that as well. So nothing new, but I did get some bids back on $3 million of revenue anticipation notes that the select board need to vote and authorize next week. It's amazingly low interest rate for $3 million. It was a 1% interest rate, and they're willing to pay a premium, which brought it down to like 0.76%. It cost us less than like $2 or $3 grand to borrow $3 million for 90 days.
Oh.
But the larger activity we have is we do have some project bond anticipation notes that are coming due in December. And so we will be rolling those over into a long-term bond. And when we do that, we need to go and have a ratings call with S&P. And so this will be my first opportunity being with the town of Eastham to do that. I would imagine that we're going to hold our own, and I don't think they're looking to do any upgrades in this environment. but I do want to take that experience to build on it, because in looking at past rating analysts' reports, we've got room for some improvement. So, and I think we can make those improvements relatively easily. And as we go through a recovery here over the next year or two, perhaps have an opportunity to get to a AAA community. So that's something I'll be working on that. And part and parcel of that is doing a multi-year projection. So once we get through town meeting and they get the budget rolling and we get through the bonding and the rating calls, I'd like to put in front of you at some point, Jerry, for your discussion, results of what a 5-year projection on the operating budget look like, so we can get some sense of that. So those are my updates.
All right. Any questions from anyone on the committee for Rich?
I
Mary?
have one.
Steve?
Go ahead, Mary.
Rich, given the low interest rates, is it at all possible to refinance anything that we currently have to a lower rate?
Yeah, that's a great question and a very obvious question. I already tried that one, Mary. Yeah, it is very possible. However, a lot of these bonds have call provisions that limit you from doing that for a certain number of years. And we had previously done that 4 or 5 years ago, the elementary school refunding bond. So next opportunity is going to be in 2025. So I already got it booked on my calendar.
Okay. Great. Any other questions? Pete, did you have one, or you just said the Mary one?
No, Steve.
Jerry,
Joe, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, it's not a question, but it's sort of an observation and a hope that we could set up a process. Assuming the charter review recommendations are accepted by town meeting, one of the changes that affects this committee is that the 5-year capital plan is submitted to the select board after consultation with the finance committee. And I just want to remind us all of that. And it would be good going forward if there was a kind of a helpful process to Rich and Jackie and to the finance committee, so that we could make that new provision, assuming it's adopted, really come to life over time.
And I think that's kind of the plan already. So as we move forward in the process, we'll work out those details. But I'm looking forward to that. I'd much rather have that and have any dissension and discussion before we get to town meeting or after, depending on when people decide to air their grievances. So it's a good way to do it.
All right. Anyone else have any questions or comments? All right, let's move to any new business. Anyone have any new business they want to raise? Mary? Go ahead, Mary.
I'm not sure who to ask. I understand under the COVID regulations that the requirement for a quorum at a town meeting does not have to be what would normally be accepted. Has the select board decided what our quorum must be for the town meeting on September 26th?
Yeah, it's 100.
100?
Yeah, so I want all of us to be there because we'll be 9% of the quorum. If Mark's there, we're 10%. So, yeah, they did drop it to 100. They could have dropped it to only 10%, like 25 or something like that, but they did it at 100.
Thank you.
All right. I have a question that Rich might know, or maybe even argument. What's going on? There seems to be an awful lot of pipes and construction material at tea time. And what do we know what's happening there?
I can answer that.
Go ahead.
There's a company that's doing power work in the area. And asked us if they could store the equipment on tea time for like 2 or 3 months. They're gonna pay about $15.7 thousand, and they've agreed to tear down the tea time building.
Nice. That's wonderful.
I would assume it should be gone by the beginning of the year at the latest.
That's good. Thank you. Thanks for update, Art.
And thank you very much for joining us. I think it's wonderful that the liaison with the select board doesn't mind showing up at our meetings. I
I
appreciate it.
wouldn't miss it.
All right, does anyone have anything else?
Jeremy?
Jerry?
Yes. Go ahead.
Me, Tom?
Yeah.
Yep. A couple things. I wanted to mention to the committee, you know, we have our Rock Harbor Improvement Project. That is moving along. And we had a site visit there last Thursday, and some, with the, you know, the designer, the architect, those people, and the town staff. And some members of the public, residents of the area, I believe, mostly, were there. They showed up at the meeting too and had a lot of questions and comments or whatever. And I believe what's planned, Jackie's not with us, but I'm, you know, last I heard, there's a select board meeting on Monday evening, and she's going to brief the select board about this, and it's also going to serve as a public hearing, though the people have been told that there'll be this public hearing where they can more appropriately weigh in on the project, talk about whatever their concerns are, that type of thing. So that'll be Monday. I'll be dialing into that as the finance committee rep, and Art is on the call here with us.
It's going to be part of the select board meeting. It's not, you know, a formal public meeting as such as they normally have, but it's going to be a project presentation where the public can weigh in on their concerns or issues or questions. So hopefully, I think Jackie will probably put it near the beginning of the agenda, but I don't know when it's going to be. The meeting is 5:30 on the 14th.
All right.
And we'll see what happens from there.
Okay.
Will that be
Tom?
on channel 18? Will that be
sorry?
on channel, will that be on channel 18?
I assume we'll be doing it broadcasting as we normally do. I don't know that for sure.
Okay, Tom, do you have anything else you wanted to raise?
Yeah, I wanted to also note that I believe tomorrow evening, there's like a pre-town meeting.
Yes, I was going to bring it next. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, and that's, again, in the current circumstances, it's going to be a Zoom meeting instead of in person like normally would be. And I would assume a lot of people will dial into that, a lot of, you know, residents to get a better understanding of some of the things that are there. So I don't think, is there anything we need to do for that? I'll dial into it, but anything in particular we need to discuss after that or anything like that?
Well, if something comes up at that in the discussion with Jackie, then I can, we only need 48 hours to notice a meeting. If there's something that would be necessary for us to have a meeting, I'll let you know right after that. But I don't anticipate, we've had this is something that happens all the time, and you show up and what it allows generally is the publics, the citizens, can ask questions about each warrant and get a further explanation than just the little paragraph that's written in each warrant. So, excuse me, in each article. So that's generally what it is. I'm going to try to call in on to join that. The Zoom meeting is written on the front of that printed the printed warrant that came out through the mail. It's right on the front page. So it's 6 to 8 tomorrow, and if you feel the urge, please join in. Anyone have anything else?
Jerry, I have a question, comment.
Yeah.
And this touches a little bit on something that we went through when we had our discussion on the override parts of the warrant. In the Cape Cod Times, there was an article that described the warrant for the town of Orleans. And the article said that there were, I think, 10 items. There were capital items. There were separate articles in their warrant. And it said that one of them was going to require an override, but that 9 of them were going to be dealt with through a debt exclusion, which I found very interesting because that's a very high percentage of expenditures that are being handled through the debt exclusion as opposed to the override. And what struck me was, are there some guidelines or policies in the town of Eastham that sort of push you in the direction of an override or a debt exclusion? Some guidelines that we can apply so that we didn't have to do sort of an ad hoc, individualized discussion for capital items each time we go through an annual warrant issue. I guess I would appreciate it because I'm just not versed in the history. Jackie at our last meeting said that the prior town administrator had relied fairly heavily on using override provisions to fund capital projects. The suggestion I got from the way she described it was that maybe that wasn't the right way to have done it, or maybe it would have been better to use debt exclusions or capital exclusions or something like that. So I certainly would appreciate it if maybe at one of our meetings where we don't have too heavy an agenda, if Rich could sort of make a presentation on the pros and cons of an override versus a debt exclusion, and perhaps we could among ourselves have a conversation about creating some guidelines or policies that we might present to the select board that might be useful in dealing with those issues going forward.
I think that's a good idea. Rich, your thought, you have any comment on that?
Yeah, no, it's exactly kind of where I'm going, looking at the capital plan from past years and how we should approach it going forward. And as Steve pointed out, the new charter provisions. So it's all part and parcel of that same thing. It also fits in exactly with what I need to do with regarding our S&P rating calls and getting a AAA bond rating. We need to have documented and solid financial policies, including capital planning. But, you know, for example, that was one of the reasons I provided to you about the capital override for this year, for the 400,000. And there is any number of reasons, but that's, for an example, George, a reason. You were referencing the town of Wellfleet has 10 capital votes. But you don't, in my opinion, you know, the best practice would be, you don't want to be subjecting every little piece of operational equipment that's important to the ongoing operation of a department to a separate one-off ballot vote each and every time you need it. And that's kind of the concept of, and how in other communities have implemented overrides or funding for their capital plan out of the tax levy. That's what that's for, is for those routine recurring capital items. You know, an ambulance. Usually those are funded from the ambulance fund, so that might not be a good example. But police cruisers have a very definitive short-term schedule, usually 3 years. Can you keep it 4 years? Sure you could, but you get increased maintenance costs and it impacts your operation. You have downtime. So usually the reasons are operational equipment that you don't want to put in an operating budget because you don't want to distort the operating budget year to year, but you want to make sure that you have those items so you're not incurring unnecessary costs and downtime and operational impacts. But yeah, that's a great discussion to have.
So why don't we pat ourselves on the back, because we've actually done a lot to get to this point. Article 4, as revised at George's suggestion and work with Rich and all that, has created essentially just what Rich is talking about now. Now, if in the future we want a higher number than 400,000, we could consider that. But we've assuming Article 4 passes, we've created through an override, which is perpetual, a fund to fund these routine capital expenditures. What I thought George was going to say in that article, George, in the Cape Cod Times, when they were discussing, I think it was that article, but in any case, when they were discussing, it was the Eastham article about all the things that the Eastham warrant was doing. When they got to Article 4, they made it sound like it was just about police radios, and it did not sound like the Article 4 we ended up with. So the public, at least in that article, didn't get a sense of the progress we had actually made already.
One of the things that I'm hoping to have done after we get through the pre-town meeting is work with some of the town staff and have a dedicated website page to the annual town meeting. This past weekend, I actually got together with Jackie and we filmed a couple of videos. So I put some things together. And so we have, at this point, 4 and hopefully have 5 or 6 by the time we're done. Short videos of 2 minutes or so a piece on specific articles. And one of them was on that Article 4 explaining that this is a capital override.
That's a terrific idea, Rich.
And so hopefully they'll be well received and they'll be on the website. And I sent them to Mike Cleary today, so hopefully he'll get them up on Channel 18 the next day or 2 as well. One example that I could give you of how this is important in the town that I came from before I was had a vacancy in the IT director's slot. But before he left, he made sure that he had in the capital plan some server replacements. But then he left, and there was nobody left to champion the cause. So in the vacuum between him leaving and me taking on that responsibility for that shop, that stuff got dropped, didn't get voted. And of course, you only got one bite at the apple for the year, and we didn't carry a very big reserve fund. But when you know that those servers failed, and phones were down, email was down, network was down, town could not do business. So, we made do on an emergency basis for the amount of time it took to get those in place and then to cobble apart parts of funding from other places and get proper votes to use that money. But, we really shouldn't have been screwing around with not replacing our servers. And so what I did, I put in place is instead of asking town meeting to vote, a police department file server or a print server for town hall, because none of which nobody knew what that meant, I came up with a network equipment and IT replacement program, which was basically the same amount. It was 50 grand a year, every year. And what it represented was basically the total cost of replacing network equipment over a 6-year period. So every year you had a revolving fund of money. You didn't have to care that it was a PD file server or the town hall print server. If that server needed to be replaced, you replaced it. And was that a sufficient amount of money for the total network operation? And so those are the types of things you can do when you got dedicated funding to make sure that those mission critical pieces of operating equipment, are maintained and in place, and you don't drop don't have a loss of service of a critical nature.
Good. George, I think that I'll put that on after and try and do it before we get to January when we're in the middle of the budget. Try and have that kind of discussion looking at borrowing and debt exclusion versus overrides and so forth. And maybe we can come up with a policy recommendation for the select board working with Rich and Jackie. And so I think that's a good point, and I'll add it on the agenda. Anybody have anything else? Nothing else. I will one thing before I entertain a motion to adjourn. We will see each other, I hope, with masks on the football field on Saturday, September 26th. Let's try and get there at the latest at 9:45 a.m. so we can arrange where we're sitting and all of that kind of stuff and help us out. All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
That was Rick. Do I have a second?
Second.
That's Russ. All right, have to go roll call. Steve Cole.
Yes.
George.
Yes.
Steve Z.
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
Russ.
Yes.
Mary.
Yes.
Peter.
Yes.
And Jerry's a yes. Did I miss anybody?
Yes.
Mary,
Rick.
Rick and Mary.
I said yes.
Oh, you did? Okay. 9-0, we're adjourned. See you on Saturday on the football field.